Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. In this one, I'm going to be doing a fantasy football mock draft in an auction draft on ESPN. Looks like I'm nominating from the 12th spot. Nomination order doesn't necessarily matter too much in an auction draft, but should be a lot of fun. This will be my first auction draft for the channel this year. I've done several of them already, so it's going to be fun to sort of build these out. Most of the auction drafts I do just for like actual leagues. I tend to do them on ESPN, and I also find that ESPN is one of the best places to do them. I find that the values on other platforms is pretty whack. Sleepers decent, Fantasy Pros like Yahoo not great. Nothing else has really been done too much. So generally, I find that ESPN is the best place to do these mocks, and they've actually kind of got a cool feature now when you go to the mock draft room where you can where you can actually do like a practice mock draft with your actual league settings. They'll show you what the league values will be for your thing. It'll account for keepers and all that. So that's pretty cool. But it's sort of interesting to see what happens there. Really fun to do these. Sort of fun to see what we can do with different builds and just sort of see what happens there. So yeah, I'll sort of go through my general thoughts and stuff. I always say I'm going to mute that in time before one of these, and I have yet to not fail you guys. So I'll get it down before the end of the off season. But yeah, that being said, we get started here with CeeDee Lamb being the first player nominated. As much as I like CeeDee Lamb, I don't find myself necessarily spending a ton of value on him. There's a lot of guys on the platform right now that I think are extremely undervalued. Like if we go down here, look at Marvin Harrison and Drake London, $27, $26 of pre-draft value compared to Puka, Garrett Wilson going for double of that. Those are guys that I'm absolutely going to target getting on my roster on this platform. I will do some videos later on this offseason, especially when we get some more like ironed out actual values, more ironed out ADPs over just what I'd be looking to spend for a lot of these players and tops, and in conjunction with the actual discrepancies on all these platforms, because you can gain a lot of advantage over your league mates just by understanding that the pre-draft value that is showing you here is not necessarily very good. So having that in mind, that's going to be really great for you in terms of your ability to actually get some guys that you really like. Some other guys that are way cheaper than you see normally going for. James Cook's a pretty good value. Nico Collins is a really good value. Jalen Waddle is $21. I think that could end up being like just my 4-pack of the wide receiver position right there on here. Again, it's going to be league dependent. You might have some people that are sharp in your league that aren't going to let you get these guys for what the pre-draft value is, but it's a good gauge, and you could sort of just go in sort of knowing what your targets are, see what you can get. Looking at the running back position, though, there aren't a ton of crazy values. James Cook's one of my favorite ones here. I love trying to target James Cook. You get into the running back position lower down, like Najee Harris for $5 is awesome. Zach Moss for $2 is awesome. Raheem Mostert for $1 is insane. That makes Raheem Mostert a free draft pick. That's just wrong. But that's what we're going with there. So just sort of queuing guys that I really like the pre-draft values on, and then we've obviously got to keep in mind just to be active and look at this. Another thing, look at this. We got Trey McBride, $11 of pre-draft value. Kelsey, $34. Laporta, $35. We're going to get McBride in this roster. I know it kind of sucks that we already have, or we're planning on getting Marvin Harrison too, but I don't mind drafting both those guys. I think they're going to be awesome. I would probably avoid having Kyler as well in that build just because in redraft I don't want that much week-to-week variance, but it's not something that I would necessarily avoid either. I think Dalton Kincaid's really great value as well. Those are two of the best values on this platform right now. It's pretty much a consensus, like tier 1 at the tight end position. There's those top 5 guys, and even Andrews at 14 is really great value. So definitely trying to leave this draft with one of those 3 guys. At the quarterback position, again, just look at the crazy values, especially when you drop here. Guys like Jordan Love, Kyler Murray, each for $4. Gonna probably try and get Jordan Love here. I'm open to getting CJ Stroud for 10 as well. That makes me excited. But yeah, so now we can sort of keep looking at these guys. None of the values have been keeping an eye on them as we're going. Nobody really stood out as a crazy value for me. I don't find myself being a team that really being a manager that really tries to spend up on a player super early on in the draft. There need to be a value that presents itself early on, because I sort of find that these round 1 guys end up just being a little bit overpriced. They don't get me as excited. Kyron is someone that I'm super excited about. I am pretty high up on him compared to ADP. I think he's going to be really good for us this season, and if I can get him for around that pre-draft value, I'm interested. I'm not willing to go over, especially now that we're going to be $5 over if I want to be involved. I think I'll just try and get Jahmyr Gibbs, who's going for cheaper. That's a really great value here if you just look at the running back position. Normally, like Jahmyr Gibbs being $10 cheaper than Saquon Barkley is insane, especially on this platform when normally you're looking at Jahmyr Gibbs going 5-6 picks ahead of Saquon. So that's a really crazy value. We definitely want to target that. Jamar Chase is interesting. I'm certainly going to be interested if he can go for a reasonable value, but again, we're not going to spend up to that much of our budget on him. I know he's great, but it's just some of the values they're presenting themselves in this platform. I want to be able to highlight those, and I want to make sure that we can really build the best roster we can here. So just a quick look. Let's just say hypothetically I get all four of these wide receivers. So Harrison, London, Collins, Waddle. That's going to cost me just over $100 of my budget. We want to leave $2 per bench player, so that's going to put us at 114. $2 for kicker and defense each, so 116. Got $84 left. Let's say I spent 10 on the quarterback. That gives us $74 left. That means for our two running back spots and our tight end, we're looking at spending roughly $74. I think that's sort of perfect. That means I can spend 50-ish on Jahmyr Gibbs here, spend 10-ish on my tight end, and I can spend 10-ish on my RB2. So if we can get Gibbs for 50, I'm absolutely going to participate in that. I'll go a little bit higher than that. And we don't also necessarily need to get four high-end wide receivers. It's just that I really wanted to highlight some of those guys that I really do think are insane values in this platform. And getting Gibbs for 51, that's going to be an awesome start to our roster. Now we're going to sort of start highlighting guys a little bit early. Let's just select Marvin Harrison, get him on the board here, get him onto the roster, sort of highlight how these ADPs are going to play out. One thing that I've noticed when you do nominate a guy a little bit earlier than where the platform suggests, you end up overpaying by a tiny bit. Maybe a couple dollars, but it's totally okay. It just sort of limits the risk of there being some sort of crazy bidding war later on. When you get later on, it's not really going to apply to a guy like Marvin Harrison, who is still going to get nominated pretty soon, but you put yourself in a spot where you might have people that just have way too much money, and then you're not going to be able to compete with them because they know they have to blow it there. So that's awesome. Like I said, Marvin Harrison for $29, that's insane. That's like a round 3, round 4 value on the guy for a guy that's going in the early second round. If you're on ESPN right now and for whatever reason you're doing like important drafts in early July, just get yourself Marvin Harrison. I got to believe that if you're doing important drafts with people, they're probably pretty smart too. No, that's not necessarily accurate, but if you can get Harrison for that value, you've absolutely got to target doing that. Justin Jefferson for 61, that's awesome, but I just don't necessarily find myself doing that either. Like I said, I think it's very reasonable to say that Marvin Harrison could end up with a better year this year, and I got him for half of that, so it's just not something that I'm going to try and do here. Going to be targeting some of the guys that I've got tagged or queued up later. So we're probably going to be sitting here twiddling our thumbs a little bit. Jefferson's going to be great. He's still probably the most talented wide receiver in the NFL. I really like him. I think he's certainly a player that could overcome the surroundings, the surroundings being Sam Darnold or a rookie quarterback, but it's just not something that I'm necessarily trying to take that risk on, and I'd prefer to look elsewhere there. Otherwise, though, we keep looking at the wide receiver or players that are coming up. Some other values we could look at. Another thing I like to do is just sort of scrolling down, looking at these like $1, $2 guys that I want to be looking at to get on my bench here. Deontay Johnson, I know he's $4. I talked about him a ton. I want to be sure we're targeting him. I think Jaden Reed at $4 and Christian Kirk at $5. Those are some insane values. I talked a lot about Zach Moss. David Njoku I love, but just don't think I'm going to need him because I'll get a value somewhere else there. Corum for $1 is someone that I definitely want. I like the value of Jameson Williams. Charbonnet is a really great value. If you want to double up on the quarterback position on ESPN, you can do that and get Jaden Daniels for $1. I don't hate doing that. I like Shaheed and Mooney quite a bit. I think Curtis Samuel is just kind of an insane value right now. It doesn't make sense to me that he's being drafted this late. Like, he's got a shot to lead that team in targets. It's probably going to be Kincaid, and Coleman's probably going to be the number 2 there, but it's possible. They give Samuel a lot of money. Samuel's a good player, and I think where he's being drafted is great. Demario Douglas, I think he's going to be a really good flex player for us this season. Rico Dowdle is a guy that I like drafting. A lot of guys here. It's just sort of like to have these guys queued up and just in the back of my mind so that when we get there, I've got them like at the forefront of my mind and I know who I'm going to be looking for. Oh, you guys know I love Chris Olave, but I just can't get myself to pay 44 when I can get a guy like Drake London for 26, and Drake London is normally going earlier. Nico Collins is 26. He's normally going right around where Olave is going. On this platform, it just doesn't make sense to be targeting a guy like Olave, especially if they're going to go for right around these ADPs. So, not going to be doing that. Another value that I'll just point out, a couple of them, we got DJ Moore and Brandon Ayuk. Those are guys that are going pretty significantly below their consensus ADP here. Brandon Ayuk normally being drafted as like the wide receiver 13. You'd expect him to cost you a lot more than that on this platform. I'm kind of out on him at that ADP, but on this platform, spending $25, 12.5% of your budget, I think that's totally reasonable and justified. And I think Brandon Ayuk's a pretty good target on the ESPN platform as well. It'll be interesting to see what happens to all these ADPs and pre-draft values as we get deeper and deeper into the offseason. Devontae Adams, you have watched this channel a little bit this offseason. You know he made the video of one of the worst values for me this draft or this year. Just not a guy I'm targeting at all. I think he's really in a position where it could be a potential trap there. I think there's a real shot for Devontae Adams to potentially fall off a cliff this season, and I don't want to be the guy holding the bag there when that happens. So I'm looking to avoid Adams this year. He could be really great for one more season, but even last season he wasn't great. He only had 4 top 12 weeks, and it's just not something that I want to be invested in this season, especially with Aiden O'Connell or Gardner Minshew all year. Travis Etienne, that's a totally fine value, $39 for him. Pretty locked in to being a top 10 running back this year. He's a great player on a good offense. I know they've talked a little bit about wanting to use Tank Bigsby more this season, saying that Bigsby looks like he's more complete as a player this year, and maybe that's true, but I just don't see it really happening. I think Etienne's still going to see 300-ish touches, probably score fringe 10 touchdowns, and catch a lot of passes, so Etienne's a really great value. Michael Pittman, I've talked a little bit about him. It's just the guy, he's kind of a safe draft pick, but I don't really see the ceiling there. He's not that guy that necessarily scores a lot of touchdowns, and in that offense, you could have a really run-heavy offense. Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson should do everything for that team, and then you've also got Adonai Mitchell coming in. He's a good player that can steal a lot of touchdowns. Joshua Downs is going into year 2. He could certainly be involved in the offense and take a step up, and I think you just might see a bit of a lesser target share for Michael Pittman this season, and that does make me a little bit less excited about him. Mike Evans, I love Mike Evans again this season, but again, it's just all about cost. Look at that pre-draft ADP, or pre-draft value, $41. You've got guys like Drake London, who's normally drafted ahead of Mike Evans, going for 26. So it doesn't make sense to spend up for that just because of the value. At 33, it's interesting. He's definitely a value there. I would consider doing it, but because we've still got these values here, I've got Drake London ahead of Mike Evans, and he's someone that I don't necessarily want to be missing out on because I took Mike Evans. So we're going to get Drake London here probably. We'll see what we can do. If we can get him for $26, $27, I'll go up to 30 even if I have to. He's going to be really great, especially if he's your wide receiver too. Like right now, I've got Harrison as my 1. London is a 2. It's going to put you in a really good spot every single week, and that's a ton of upside. There's some risk associated with it for sure. I think these are guys that clearly do have sort of unknown floors and ceilings just because we haven't seen them necessarily do it in the NFL yet. But I think this is the year they're going to put it together for sure, especially Harrison. I'm not necessarily as high on London, but on this platform, he's someone that I'm definitely targeting just because of the cost. It's tough to ignore that. So yeah, otherwise, looking at the wide receivers here, really excited about getting the guy like, I'm not going to get Brandon Ayuk, just don't love him. DJ Moore is an option for sure, as is Jalen Waddle. Nico Collins is interesting because I'm considering targeting a guy like CJ Stroud later, so getting that stack is always super exciting. And I think Nico Collins has got just as good a shot as anybody to be a top 5 guy. Tank Dell is another really great value on this platform. If you take a look just a little bit lower, he's $13. That is obviously super exciting. And that does sort of make me a little bit less excited about Nico Collins because if you can get Nico Collins for half off, that's obviously great. And I don't think we know for sure who the wide receiver 1 in that offense is. I would bet it's Collins followed by Dell, but we don't necessarily know that. So I think there's an argument to be made for prioritizing Dell over Collins. So then we've got Alvin Kamara. Kamara going for 40, Joe Mixon going for 40. I think those are a little bit too high here. We saw ETN go for just about the same amount, and ETN's clearly better than, in my opinion, this season. I think Derrick Henry is a better value or a better player this season as well, and he went for cheaper. So those are not guys I'd necessarily be targeting on this platform, but I don't hate it. Like those are guys that are going to be the top 15 guys, but it's really interesting seeing the juxtaposition between ESPN and Underdog right now because the running backs are actually really high up on these draft boards. There's a lot of them going pretty high as to where on Underdog it's all wide receiver, and there's a lot of wide receivers going late now that are super interesting. So again, it's going to be really important as we get deeper and deeper into the offseason to keep in mind what platform you're playing on, play by those ADPs because that's really what matters. It doesn't matter if Yahoo's got an ADP and you're never playing on it. You don't care about that. So you want to make sure that you're well aware of what the platform is that you're on, make note of what the contradictions are going to be between that platform and others, and that way you can capitalize on different values there. James Cook's the guy that I'm super excited about this season. My apologies. My headset likes to turn off every now and then. It's kind of annoying. James Cook's a guy that I'm certainly super excited about this season. $35 I think is a very fair price. It's just not something that I'm necessarily trying to do because I think there's other values here, especially the wide receiver position. And I've already got Gibbs, and there's a lot of cheaper running backs late. Like if I get Gibbs and I add Najee Harris, Zach Moss, Raheem Mostert, I think it's a pretty good running back room, and it's really cheap the rest of the way. So I don't necessarily want to spend too much on other guys. think that's a good spot to be in, and I'm really happy with the way this team's shaping up right now. Otherwise, here we saw Sam Laporta go for 39. We're probably going to see Kelsey go for a little bit less than that. I just can't come around to that because, like I said, if we look at the tight end position, there's a lot of value with the guys going later. Like, there's a massive drop off in cost in this platform going from Kelsey to Andrews, McBride, to Kincaid, Ingram. And I don't think there's going to be a massive drop off in production between those guys. So, drafting guys like Kelsey and Laporta, it's fun. I think they're really good players, and it's fun to have Kelsey on your team. Sure, it makes the roster look a little bit sexier, but it's just not something that I'm necessarily trying to do. I think that value there is just definitely there for the other tight ends. It doesn't make sense to draft any of those top two right now, especially on ESPN. So we're going to have Nico Collins coming up here. I'll certainly be involved in that, assuming he gets nominated here. I think he's going to be a really great player for us and someone that I am excited about. It's just not something that I necessarily need to have because I think I really want Tank Dell as well. So we can keep that in mind. Josh Jacobs, it's really interesting to see what's going to happen with Josh Jacobs this year. I like the value on Underdog for sure. On ESPN, it's a little bit different. At 31, it's a little interesting. Like, if you look at the running backs going around him, you've got Kenneth Walker for 30. So if you look at it, I think that's a pretty good value. I'd rather have Jacobs than Walker. Achane for 28. As much as I have sort of bashed on Achane, I think I just prefer the upside of Achane. But there's a pretty clear drop-off in cost, especially on the ESPN platform. Once you go from Kenneth Walker to Ramondre, you go immediately from a $30 ADP or pre-draft value to 8. So if you want to save on the running back position, ESPN is telling you there's a huge tier break there. Maybe there is. I don't think it's necessarily that significant. So I think Kenneth Walker, you could make an argument for him being like one of the worst values on this platform right now. So keep that in mind. DK for 24 is certainly something that I'm interested in. I know I didn't necessarily star him, but he's someone that I do think is a really great value. I'm not going to get in a bidding war over him because I like DJ Moore and Waddle just as much, and Collins just as much too, and I don't want to overpay because I want to make sure I can get the value there. So let's see what happens here. Debo's another guy I really like. For 25, he's a really great value. I think both Niners are great, but I think it's tough for both of them to end up being fantastic on a weekly basis for fantasy. I prefer Debo because there's just more manufactured touches for him. I think he's going to be a more reliable player for us, but both are great. I think that it's just a matter of which preference you want and also just sort of what kind of player you want on your roster. If you want the weekly upside, then I think that a guy like Debo would be, or Ayuk would be that for you. And if you want a weekly floor, I think Debo's going to give that for you. So I'm going to nominate Waddle here. I want to get him on the roster. If we can get him for cheap, that's going to be super exciting. If he's going to be our wide receiver 3 and we can get him for $21, that's absolutely fantastic. Keeping a look at our budget here, we've got $94 here. Doing pretty good shape here. There's two teams, Team 1 and Team 12, that have a lot more than us, but nobody else actually does, and it's kind of a good spot to be in. I'm going to spend just a little bit more than the pre-draft value here. I would be willing to go even higher if I had to, but there's just other guys like DJ Moore and Nico Collins still on the board, so I don't want to force myself into a bidding war. But that's super great. Getting Waddle as your wide receiver 3 is fantastic. That's a really great wide receiver room I've built out here, and it cost me $77. That's pretty great because you'll see, like, if we just want to go all the way back, let's see how much CeeDee Lamb went for. CD went for 64. So for $13 more, I got 3 really good wide receivers instead of just getting 1. And yeah, CD's better than all those guys, but I think the discrepancy there just doesn't make sense. I think getting a guy like Harrison, getting a guy like London, getting Waddle, that's going to be really great for my roster. And now DJ Moore is someone that I can even consider as well. We've got the capital to do it. It's a little bit scary spending up a little bit on your bench before you get to filling out your starting lineup, but I think I'm going to be willing to do it if I have to. I'm not going to get into a bidding war there, though. I think we're probably going to target someone like Tank Dell instead. Because I want to make sure we can get a quarterback we want. Getting a guy like CJ Stroud's going to be great if I can go Stroud and Dell. That's going to feel really good. And I also want to get guys like, I want to make sure I get Trey McBride on the roster, or Dalton Kincaid, or Mark Andrews. One of those guys. The only reason I'm shying away from McBride a little bit is just because I've got Marvin Harrison already. So it's a little bit interesting to see what we'll do there, but it's just sort of tough. I also am interested in getting Kyler potentially if things shake out that way, and getting Trey McBride would sort of move Kyler off my board because I don't want to have all 3 of those guys. That's a little bit too much exposure to the Cardinals. I don't want my entire team to be nuked if I'm just wrong about that. So I don't want that much exposure unless I'm doing like an underdog best ball style draft where it's just all about upside, and then it makes a lot of sense to target things like that. Devonta Smith, he's great, but I talked a little bit about how I just don't necessarily see him as like someone that I want on my roster this season. I think that he's effectively the 3rd most important player to that team's offense, the Eagles' offense, and I think it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride. He'll probably finish right around like a fringe top 24 guy. He was a wide receiver 19 last season, so it's totally fine where he's being drafted. It's just not something that I'm super excited about. We got Nico Collins on the board. I love Collins. I love the value here, but I want to make sure we're not being I don't want to be too ambitious and fill up our bench this early and then end up not getting the starting lineup we want. It's definitely important to prioritize that starting lineup, and there's a lot of guys left that I really want. Like I think if I get Stroud and Trey McBride, I'm gonna feel really good about that, and then I can start looking at my running back two. Running back two here is gonna be a bit weaker. We're probably looking at a guy like David Montgomery, a guy like Najee Harris. That's probably what our running back two is going to end up being, but that's totally fine. Those are guys that are just reliable, and then pairing those with someone like Jahmyr Gibbs I think is really great because Gibbs is going to give you that weekly explosive upside, and then getting a Montgomery, Najee Harris, even a Brian Robinson, someone that's just going to give you reliable production and not be the reason you lose on a weekly basis. That's nice to have on the roster when you're accompanying guys with this much upside. And if you look at the wide receiver room we've got too, I think there's going to be a lot of volatility with these guys. Waddle, he's the wide receiver 2 for his offense, so he's not necessarily the most reliable weekly asset. Marvin Harrison, he's a rookie. It's tough to know how reliable he's going to be on a weekly basis. Drake London, this could potentially be some growing pains there in Atlanta early on in the season, so maybe Drake London starts off a little bit slow, as does maybe Marvin Harrison. It's possible that this team, as we have built it here, starts off slow, so that's why we're going to want to get a couple other receivers in the bench that we can trust, make sure that if things don't break right early on, I don't want to have to panic and move guys because I want to make sure we're still getting production and not just sinking the roster if that happens. So just keep that in mind when you're drafting guys. If you're drafting rookies high up, if you're drafting guys in new offenses, new coaching staff, stuff like that, there is the possibility for these guys to start off slow as they sort of gain their footing and get a real understanding of what's happening in the offense that they're in. So just be prepared for potential slow starts if you do have to draft teams like that. So I've got Lamar getting nominated. I like the value of Lamar. He's really great. He's a really talented player. It's the MVP twice already for a reason. The only concern I have really is that we could see Derrick Henry score a lot of touchdowns for this team, and every time Derrick Henry scores, it's not going to be Lamar Jackson. So that's the only issue. I think Lamar's still probably a top 5 quarterback in fantasy this season. Could be a bit of a bumpy ride. It's a little bit inconsistent with him, but he's a great player. I wouldn't shy away from him at all. I think he's definitely going to be good for us this year. Cooper Kupp, another player that I'm interested in. I want to not need Cooper Kupp to be really good if I get him on my roster. So like the build I have right now, if he ended up being my wide receiver 4, even if he's a wide receiver 3, I think that's totally okay. But if you're drafting him as a 2, as a guy that you're banking on starting every single week, I think that could be where you could go a little bit awry. I just don't know what we're going to get out of Cooper Kupp, to be honest. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I have a good grasp of what's going to happen. My gut tells me that Cooper Kupp is a little bit over the hill. He's not the same player he once was. He's a little bit injury prone. He's pretty clearly the number 2 in his offense now. I think it's going to be an offense that's going to want to run the ball a little bit more now that they've got Kyron and Corum. Stafford's getting older. He's a little bit injury prone. There are a lot of red flags there, so I don't want to be too over ambitious with that. So I'm going to put CJ Stroud up here. Stroud's going to be a guy that I want to get on my roster. If I can get him for 10 or less, I'm definitely going to do that. And then I'll probably target Dell with my next selection or whenever he comes up. It's just going to be a really great start to the roster. If we can get Trey McBride as well, we're going to have some of my personal favorites on this roster and be super excited about what we're building there. So that's a really great start to the team. We're going to have CJ Stroud, Jahmyr Gibbs, Marvin Harrison, Drake London, and Jalen Waddle. Those are all guys that are going. I mean, like, if you just look at Gibbs, Harrison, London, Waddle, that's in a lot of ways like 4 late first to early second round picks, and that's super exciting. And then we're pairing that with CJ Stroud. That is awesome. Mark Andrews is intriguing here over a guy like Trey McBride just because I already have Marvin Harrison, but I would have needed a value to present itself there. Because it hasn't, I'm going to go with Trey McBride instead, or even Dalton Kincaid would be an option as well, so we'll keep that in mind. He's interesting as well. $17, it's a little bit too much for me, but I've sort of come around on him. Earlier on this offseason, I was talking a lot about him as a potential really bad pick, and I think the more I'm thinking about it, I think this Titans team is going to be extremely pass heavy, and I think because of that, and Ridley's also just clearly really good. I think that Ridley's going to be the number 1 wide receiver in a really pass heavy offense, and even if Will Levis doesn't necessarily take that full step forward, I think there will be enough to go around that I think Calvin Ridley could still be like a low end wide receiver 2, and where he's being drafted is way below that. So I like Ridley. I think he's totally fine. I find myself getting him some in drafts if you Um, there'll be an underdog video, best ball video that will get uploaded probably like 2 days after this one. I end up drafting Calvin Ridley on that team, so I do think Ridley is definitely someone that I want to keep an eye on. He's not someone that I want to bury in my drafts at all, and I do like him. But Kenneth Walker just went for a crazy value. He went for $20 instead of 30. That's definitely something to keep an eye on. I think that makes more sense just with where he should be drafted. Like I said, I highlighted that sort of drop off like crazy, going from a $30 pre-draft value to 8 going to Ramondre Stevenson. I don't think the gap's that big, so I think it makes sense to put Kenneth there as like a $20 value. Maybe they're sort of adjusting that in the background. We haven't seen that on the front end here, but we'll see what happens there going forward. Malik Neighbors, definitely someone I really like. And I really like the value on as well. He's someone I would certainly consider drafting. I think I prefer Tank Dell just with this build because I think Dell's got just as much upside and I have Stroud, so it's just giving me a little bit more weekly ceiling. But Neighbors would also certainly be on my radar here, but because we're looking at spending $25 between McBride and Dell here pretty soon, I don't want to be too ambitious there. Keenan's another player that I'd be interested in, but it's just not something that I necessarily want to be spending up on. I think he's going to be like a reliable weekly decent player. Malik Neighbors, though, I really do like. I think he could easily be a top 15 guy for us this season. It's just going to come down to target share there. I think he's got a shot at having a 32% target share. He's a really damn good player. I don't want that to go understated. Like in most drafts, he would have been the first wide receiver off the board. He just happened to be in the same draft class as Marvin Harrison. Don't worry about that. Like the only concern is that he's a giant, which sucks. Obviously, he's got Daniel Jones going to him. That's obviously not fantastic, but with no target competition around him, I think he's going to see 32, 33% of the targets. He's got a shot to see 150 targets this season, and if that's the case, he's going to be a top 15 wide receiver for us this year. And he's going to have some big games just because of how explosive he is with the ball in his hands after the catch. There's no reason he can't put up some big plays despite quarterback deficiencies there. So now I've got Tank Dell up. That's super exciting. We're going to get him on the roster. He's going to be the first player on our bench. I will check out of this draft or out of these bids if he goes up to like 15, but it's not really seeming like that's going to happen. So we'll get Tank Dell here. That's great. He's going to be a really solid flex or bench wide receiver for us. That's really awesome to have. Gives us that weekly upside when we pair him with CJ Stroud. George Pickens comes up. Another one of my favorite values. I really do love George Pickens. I think he's going to be a guy that ends up on a lot of my teams. It's probably not going to happen in this build. If you can see, we've got $51 left. We're going to be spending, $11-ish on our tight end. Be willing to go up to 15. I want to have, $15 spread up against the next couple of running backs I have, just so that I've got, decent value there. And I want to have enough to build out a decent bench. You could argue I saved a little bit too much. I maybe could have gone a little bit higher. Maybe could have gotten a different running back too. But because of that huge value drop off at the running backs after Kenneth Walker, I think there's a lot of values in the running back position a little bit later here that I wanted to. It didn't make sense to me to spend up on that. Like if I get Jonathan Brooks, David Montgomery, Najee Harris, that's a pretty good running back room behind CJ or Jahmyr Gibbs, and it costs next to nothing. So I think there's a lot of reason to not do that this year, especially on ESPN. Here's the main prize here. We're gonna get Trey McBride. He's gonna be our locked and loaded tight end 1 this season. Said it in my tight end ranking video. He is my tight end 1 at this point. I think he's got a real shot to finish the season as the tight end 1, and I think this time next year we're going to be drafting him in the second round. So really excited about McBride. He's an awesome player. I'm kind of drinking the Cardinals Kool-Aid, but I just think Kyler's a good quarterback when he's healthy, and I think there's a lot of reasons to be excited about that offense going forward. Now I want to start getting some running backs on the roster. We're going to grab Najee Harris. He's just my favorite, break glass running back too. Really solid player. He's going to get 15 to 20 touches a week, average 4 yards per carry, score 6 to 10 touchdowns this season. Just give us some points, and there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic just about this offense in general. Arthur Smith is, for all his faults, very good at orchestrating really good running games. We saw guys like Tyler Algier break the Falcons' rookie rushing record. This is an offensive line that's been revamped completely in Pittsburgh. They spend a lot of draft capital on that offensive line. It's going to be a good offensive line. They're going to run the ball really well, and Najee's going to be the focal point of that. So Najee's one of my favorite guys to draft late on drafts, and if you want to go hero RB, I think Najee's a great RB2 to build around as like that second guy, and then you can sort of just take some dart throws later on. So we've got $35 left here. Max bid of 28, so always got to keep in mind what that is here. I would say I've got a max bid of 23 because that gives me enough money for $2 left on each spend spot, so just sort of like a little rule of mine. Evan Ingram's always super interesting. I do like him quite a bit. He's sort of like the last tight end that I would be excited about going into week one as a guy that I think could be like a weekly difference maker for us. So he's certainly someone that I'm interested in. Being projected for 3 touchdowns here seems silly. I know he only had 4 last year, but that seemed unlucky. So I would probably bet he ends up with 5 or 6 this year. But regardless, I bet Ingram's going to be really solid this season. He's got another shot to break 100 catches, and that's obviously a really great floor that you're getting at every tight end. Jonathan Brooks, he's a really great draft pick this late to me. I think he's a guy that obviously isn't necessarily going to start hot because he's coming off that torn ACL in college, and Chuba's probably going to be there one early on. But Brooks, for the back half of the season, should be the clear number 1 running back in that offense, and he's actually a really good pass catcher. I don't think people give him enough credit for that. And if we think back to what Dave Canales did in Tampa Bay with Rachaad White, there's a lot of opportunity for pass catching to happen out of the backfield in his offenses. I think that's going to make Jonathan Brooks one of the steals of drafts this season, and especially over the back half, I think he's got a shot to be a league winner. And then this time next season, Brooks could easily be a guy that we're drafting in the 2nd or 3rd round, regardless of how bad this Panthers offense is. Now we've got Dak, another one of these great values, but the thing is, he cost $8, and I got CJ Stroud for $9. So just on the ESPN platform, I don't think Dak is the best value because Stroud's going so much cheaper. You've got Love and Kyler going for half of what Dak is. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me to spend up on Dak because there are a lot of better values around him. But just in like a normal redraft format where he's being drafted at ADP, I actually really like the value there. So it's just sort of interesting to see how in an auction draft it's a little bit different. Next, we've got Aaron Jones up here. He's someone that I do think is still talented, but I think the issue is just going to be health. I think Ty Chandler is going to be extremely involved in that offense. It's going to be a bit of an annoying headache for you guys if you draft Aaron Jones. You're not going to know when you can play him because you probably need a touchdown for him to be a reliable starter for you. And I can't honestly tell you how many touchdowns the Vikings are going to score this season. It could be a bit of a bumpy ride just with Sam Darnold, with J.J. McCarthy. It's not necessarily going to be an elite offense, and that just does scare me just a little bit. Amari Cooper for $12 for $9 is an insane value. Pre-draft value 12 is still really great as well. I considered pulling the trigger there. The issue is just I want to build out my running back room a little bit more. We've got 4 receivers I really like. There's also a couple guys that I just really want to get, but I think I really want to get Montgomery. I really want to get Moss. I really want to get Mostert, and then I'm also going to want to grab 2 more receivers, those being Deontay and Reed. So if we can finish that up, the draft off with that, I won't make you guys watch me draft kicker in the defense, but if we can pull that roster off, I'm going to be super stoked about this roster, and I didn't want to sort of hamstring that by spending up on getting a guy like Cooper. Rashee Rice is just so hard to know what to do with. I think that he's obviously got a shot to be a top 20 wide receiver this season. He should be the number 1 wide receiver for the Chiefs offense if he's healthy and not suspended, but the problem is he's going to get suspended, and it's just a matter of when that happens. So we'll just see what happens there. I think he's a good, not great player. They did add competition for targets in that offense with Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy. They brought back Mecole Hardman. Sky Moore's still there. Kadarius Toney's still there. I'm not saying any of those guys are good, but it's just a matter of there are a lot of bodies in that offense. I think there's going to be a lot of competition for touches, and I don't know that any one of them is necessarily going to be super fantasy viable this season. So I find myself sort of avoiding Rashee Rice. I haven't drafted him in any of the mock drafts or underdog drafts I've done this season, so not something that I'm necessarily targeting, but I get the proposition there. Swift for 7, sort of interesting. It's just a matter of I'm a little bit worried about what's going to happen in terms of his usage here. I think Roschon Johnson is actually a better pass protector, not necessarily a better pass catcher, but I could see Roschon Johnson being used on pass downs more than we want him to be. And then at the goal line, it's interesting too because Swift isn't necessarily good at that. I think Khalil Herbert could factor in there. I wouldn't be shocked at all if we end up seeing 3 running backs involved in this field. And if that happens, the entire Bears backfield is going to be effectively useless when they're all healthy. And that's just not something that I want to be super involved in. So I don't find myself drafting DeAndre Swift. I know he's pretty cheap going this late in drafts. I don't necessarily hate it. I don't think he'll bury you if you draft him and you're right or wrong. But I just don't see any league winning upside there, and I think it's going to be a bit of an annoying proposition to have him on your roster, and it could easily be a situation where you just don't even know if you can play him every single week, and I'd rather have players that I know what to do with than players that I don't. So just sort of why I'm out on him, but I do get why he could potentially be a really good value this year. You guys know I love David Montgomery. The value is not quite there like it was this last season, but especially having Jahmyr Gibbs. If I don't need to start David Montgomery every week, I really love getting him on the roster. Having the option to play both of them in any sort of game environment, you think it's going to be a lot of points. Makes a lot of sense to potentially target that. And then it just gives me a really high floor too. something happens to Gibbs, I've still got Montgomery, who would just slot right in as the top 5 running back in the weeks that Gibbs is down. And if Montgomery goes down, then Gibbs is going to be even better as well. So Montgomery, if he's my running back 4, which he is right now, that's awesome. I think he's going to be really solid for us. I still want to grab Zach Moss and Raheem Mostert, some of my favorite values. And then I also want to make sure we can get Jaden Reed and Deontay Johnson. Then we're going to have a really awesome roster here. Again, I do want to highlight here that we're doing these mock auctions. It's early July. A lot of these auction values are probably going to shift, and it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But this is just an example of what you really can do, especially when you take advantage of what the pre-draft values are on the platform you're drafting on. This is a pretty clear example of me effectively abusing what the pre-draft values are on ESPN. And if you're in a league with people who don't necessarily know a whole lot about what they're doing, especially when it comes to auction, they're not necessarily going to know how much they should be spending on players. And they really are going to look at that pre-draft value like it's gold. They're not going to want to stray too far from that. And you can really take advantage of the people that you're in the league with. And it's a huge way to gain a leg up on those guys. So definitely pay attention to that. I don't think there will be as many abusable values when we get into mid-August. So you do got to keep that in mind. It's going to be a little bit tougher. There's probably not going to be as much opportunity to draft guys like Marvin Harrison for $29, Drake London for $26, Jalen Waddle for $22. Those guys should and will get more expensive over the course of the next several weeks. But if they don't, then that's insane value, and we just keep hammering it. And if they do, then we just got to stay water, stay active, make sure we know which of the guys still present values, and understand that there will be positions and areas where these platforms get it wrong, and their ADPs and their values they're suggesting are wrong, and the people that you're drafting with aren't going to realize or recognize that, so it's going to be really easy to abuse that and highlight really gain huge advantages that you can't necessarily even gain at a standard snake draft because it's a little bit easier for these platforms to get it right. So auction drafts really do favor the people that are more prepared, and the more you prepare, the better you're going to do in your auction draft. So that's why I love doing these mocks. Just keeping track of guys that we love on different platforms and making sure that we're ready to sort of abuse whatever presents itself. Zamir White's another really interesting one. I don't know what to expect out of Zamir White, to be completely honest. Just from watching him play, I don't actually think he's that talented, but he put up some really great numbers over the backstretch last season after Josh Jacobs went down, and they've talked a lot about how much they loved him. The issue is that he's probably going to be in not necessarily a timeshare, because I think that Zamir White should see like 60, 70% of the snaps in that offense, but Alexander Madison's there. He's going to be annoying. He'll be a depth piece there. They drafted a rookie that they're talking about quite a bit, thinking someone that could step in and be involved in this offense as well. And the other issue is the offense is bad, so it's just tough for them to picture there being a lot of scoring opportunities. So you're going to need Zamir White to catch passes for him to be a reliable weekly asset. And that's tough because I don't really know what's going to happen there. Aiden O'Connell didn't necessarily throw to the running backs a ton last season. Gardner Minshew, he does do that more than the other guys, so that's an option, but not something that I'd be super excited about. I just wouldn't expect big things out of a guy like Zamir White this season, but again, he's free. The other issue, though, is he could just easily be this year's Alexander Madison, a guy who then after a couple of years in the league, had flashed as a backup, finally gets his opportunity to be a full-time starter, and he just isn't up to it. So it's tough to know. I think he's going to be fine. He'll probably finish like a low-end running back too, and I think he's being drafted appropriately, but I don't necessarily see there being any sort of ceiling for him, and I wouldn't be super excited about him because the offense is bad. And when I'm drafting guys like that, like I'd rather draft Najee for the same cost because I think the offense in Pittsburgh is going to be a lot better than the offense in Las Vegas. Or I'd much rather draft Zach Moss because the offense is going to be way better in Cincinnati than it's going to be in Vegas. Or Raheem Mostert, who we've seen be a top 3 running back in the last year. There's just a lot of other guys that I think are way better values because the ceiling's there, and I think the same floor is also there because we just know what these guys are and what their roles are going to be. After that, we saw Warren, Pitts, McLaurin go. All fine picks. I think Warren's a good value for $5. Kyle Pitts for $4. I don't hate that at all, especially if I think drafting Kyle Pitts as your second tight end is actually sort of a savvy move if you realize you're in an auction draft and you have money left over. Spend it on something. So, like, if you find yourself in a spot where you've screwed up at that point, obviously, you've got too much money left on your plate, you're not necessarily optimizing what your roster is going to end up looking like, spend up and get just trade value. So get a second tight end that's high value, get a second quarterback. Like, if I had excess money and didn't know what to do with it, drafting Jordan Love here would be perfectly reasonable. He's a player I'll be able to trade over the course of the season if I need to. I could trade CJ Stroud if I needed to and keep Love. Having that flexibility is valuable, and you just want to make sure that you spend all of your money or end up with players that you're super excited about, because if you don't do that, you're just ending up with a team that you don't like and extra money, and it's just not good. So Give yourself draft capital you can trade away later on if you have to. Don't put yourself in a spot you've got a bunch of money left over and just aren't going to be competitive because you wasted $50 and didn't draft guys that you can use. So we just got Deontay for $4. That's fantastic. I'm going to put Zach Moss up here. Actually, yeah, I'll put Mostert up because Mostert's my guy. I got to get Mostert on a lot of my teams this year. Super excited about him. We'll see if it just lets us have him for $1. I'll pay 3, I'll pay 5, I'll pay 10, whatever. I think Mostert's going to be fantastic this season, and really the ADP is just silly. They're not going to give Achane a full workload. It's not going to be a 20-touch guy for Achane, and you shouldn't want that if you're an Achane manager either, because I don't think Achane can handle that sort of workload. And to be fair, neither can Mostert, historically speaking, but Mostert's a guy that's going to get used on the goal line. He's probably going to score 10, 12 touchdowns again this season, break off a couple really long runs. He's just a damn good player, and I don't see any reason to expect him to get less than 10 to 15 touches a week, and he's going to be a guy that you can play every single week. And if he's your running back too, I think that's going to be really awesome for you guys. And I sort of think that he's the same as Devon Achane at this point. They're both injury risk running backs that aren't going to get more than 15 touches a week in Miami, and you're just hoping that they end up being the ones that hit home runs. And I get that Achane's probably a little bit more explosive at this point in their careers, but Mostert's also proven that he's going to have the goal line role, and Mostert is also the veteran who they're talking about being the guy that's going to lead that running back room. And he's just a really good player, and if they can both stay healthy, I'm excited for both of them. But I think Mostert's definitely being slept on too much this year. Jake Ferguson, I like. I think he's sort of the end of the tight ends where you're at a point where you can go into the year and say you're confidently starting him almost regardless of matchup. But I do think he's a pretty significant. He's like a poor man's Evan Ingram, I guess, with maybe extra touchdown upside. But he's just not a guy that I'm super excited about. I think that he's probably going to end up with 60 to 70 catches this year, 800 yards, 5, 6 touchdowns. Maybe he spikes and gets to 8 or 9. That'll be a good season for him, but he's just not going to put up he's not going to put up 1,000-yard, 10-touchdown season. That's just not in the range of outcomes for Jake Ferguson. Purdy for $3 makes a lot of sense to be targeting that if you miss out on quarterbacks early. I think Purdy's definitely a guy that could be good for us this season. Again, he was really good last year. There's no reason for him to be any worse this season, so it's good value. Javonte, I'm not drafting anywhere. There are reports out of camp that he's not looking good. There's potential here for this guy to not even make the team. They really like Jaleel McLaughlin. Javonte was not on the roster, or was already on the roster when Sean Payton got there, so Payton's got no attachment there. Samaje Perine's still there. We'll see if he makes the team. They drafted Audric Estime. They reports at the campus that they like him. It's possible that Javonte doesn't make the roster. I wouldn't necessarily bet on that, but I don't think it's fair to assume that Javonte is just going to be the starter either. So I'm kind of out there. Sutton, kind of out on him too. Maybe he's still the wide receiver 1 for the Broncos. Interesting to see what happens there. They've got Troy Franklin. They've got Marvin Mims. The only reason he was fantasy viable last season is because he scored 10 touchdowns, and they're not going to score that many touchdowns this season with a rookie quarterback. Rookie quarterbacks don't throw for a lot of yards or a lot of touchdowns. I would bet the under on 23 passing touchdowns for Bo Nix. Don't actually know what his line is, but it's probably right around 23. I'd bet the under on that. I bet it's very reasonable to assume they'll throw for 11, 20 touchdowns this season, and you would need a very lucky performance out of Cortland Sutton for him to end up with more than half of those. So I'm out on Sutton this season, even though he was fun last year. Jaden Reed, I'm not out on. Jaden Reed's going to be awesome this season. Going into year 2, he showed that he's clearly an elite player. He's going to be a really important part of that Packers offense, and I'm excited to see what he can do in year 2. So I like Jaden Reed quite a bit. It'll be interesting to see what he can do going forward. Hawkinson, sort of interesting. If you're in an IR league, I think it's a good thought exercise to consider taking him because you could just draft him, slap him on your IR, and then pick up another tight end to stream. The issue is I don't even know if he's going to be good when he comes back. So a little bit scary there. He's a really good player. I don't want to knock anything there. It's just that he's probably going to be the number 2 or even 3 target in a Sam Darnold or J.J. McCarthy-led offense, and that doesn't get me excited. Addison, sort of the same issue. It's just that he's going to be the number 2 target in a bad offense. Last year, he's clearly good. He had over 900 yards last season, had 10 touchdowns. He's a damn good player, and I don't think there's any reason to take that away from him. But the issue is he had 10 touchdowns and still wasn't super fantasy viable last year. And like I was saying earlier, rookie quarterbacks don't throw for a ton of touchdowns. I wouldn't bet on that happening in this offense. And if it does happen, it's going to be because of Justin Jefferson, not because of Jordan Addison. So as much as I like Addison, the talent, I just don't think it's going to be a big year for him because he's probably going to finish with 4 or 5 receiving touchdowns, and he's going to need 8 to 9 to end up paying off his ADP. We got defenses being nominated now. Sorry, there was the headset again. So you got defenses being nominated now. We got Tyler Lockett nominated. I think Lockett's a perfectly fine draft pick. It's just sort of boring. He's going to be a flex asset for us on a weekly basis, a guy that you can consider playing based on the matchup. I think he's probably the wide receiver 3 in the offense this year. I think he is regressing a little bit. JSN should be ascending. It'll be interesting to see what the offense does. I think they're going to run a lot more 3 wide receiver sets, and maybe Geno just has a really great year this season, so it's possible that Lockett's still good. But if I'm going to bet on a wide receiver for Seattle this late, it'd be JSN, not Lockett, because I want to be targeting the upside, and if JSN doesn't hit, that's totally fine. I'll just move on and find someone else on the waiver wire. So we got JSN, obviously, just speaking of him, I think he's a perfectly fine value here. It's purely an upside play. You're hoping he hits. You're hoping he breaks out into the prospect that we thought he was going to be. And if that happens, he's going to be a really great draft pick for you guys. And if it doesn't, he's going to be a bit of a bust. So just tough to know there. We got Zach Moss here. We're going to get him on the roster pretty much regardless. You can see we didn't necessarily optimize perfectly. We're going to finish this draft with, I guess, $10 left after we get a defense and kicker for $1 each. But we're going to have a really awesome team here. I'm super excited about this. If I could pencil this into any one of my rosters going forward, I would be absolutely stoked to have that. And I think this would be a team that could certainly win you guys your leagues this season. I'm sort of going top to bottom here. I'll just read it out for you guys. So at quarterback, we've got CJ Stroud. At running back, we've got Jahmyr Gibbs, Najee Harris, Jonathan Brooks, David Montgomery, Raheem Mostert, and Zach Moss. So actually a really strong room there. At wide receiver, we've got Marvin Harrison, Drake London, Jalen Waddle, Tank Dell, Deontay Johnson, and Jaden Reed. That is an absolutely insane wide receiver core. And then at tight end, we've got my tight end 1, Trey McBride. That's a really good team. I'd honestly give this team an A+, an A-, an A, whatever you want to give it. It's a 9 out of 10 team. Obviously, probably the best team you can draft on this platform, to be honest. Maybe you can do a little bit better, but really, if this is a team you could build, it's just an example of what we can do when we can abuse these sort of pre-draft values that are presented on the platform, showing that they're not necessarily right, because there's no way you can draft this team in a redraft format. This team's way too good for that, and if you could, then fantasy would be too easy at that point. So I really love this team. If you guys want more videos like this, I'll try and do more auction videos going forward, more mock auctions. I'll try and do some stuff on different platforms, get into like maybe some 10-team auction drafts, doing some more mock drafts from different spots as well, general draft strategy stuff. There's going to be a lot more videos coming out over the course of the next couple months, 3 to 4 a week. If you guys want to make sure you don't miss any of that, just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure you like the video as well, so that way I know I'm doing a good job, and it really helps with the algorithm and all that. So I appreciate all you guys. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we're getting into the heat of things, and it's really fun doing all these. So thank you guys for everything, and I'll catch you with the next one. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.